Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Slide Into Sports. Today, we're going to talk about the conference championship matchups, who is America's new team, and why the AP poll in basketball is so chaotic in comparison to the football AP poll. All right, to start the conversation on the conference championship matchups, are the Bills with Josh Allen at quarterback cursed? And I ask this because everything seemed to be in the Bills' corner for this matchup. It was at home. Pat hadn't played a playoff game on the road. He hasn't really experienced Bills Mafia to its full effect, and the Bills' offense had been hot prior to this game. The Bills ended up losing, though, due to not being able to stop the Chiefs' run game, and that's partially due to a lot of injuries on their defense, and there's also a missed field goal kick that could have tied the game towards the end. And there's also some missed touchdown catches also towards the end of the game that could have given the Bills the win without going to overtime. And we know how Patrick Mahomes is in overtime. I was worried about the Chiefs' throwing game prior to the outcome of this, but I wasn't really expecting the Bills receivers to suddenly become unable to catch the football when it matters most. But I mean, if they're anything like the Cowboys, then I guess this makes sense. In the other AFC divisional game, the Ravens blew the brakes off the Texans. Their defense was just way too much for the Texans to handle, and the Ravens' offense was also just too much for the Texans to handle in the second half. They were going blow for blow in the first half. It was tied 10-10 in the first half. But then as soon as the second half started, the Ravens just ran away with it. And then that was all she wrote. In the NFC, the Lions make it to the NFC Championship after beating the Bucs. That game went down the way I thought it would. A lot of times where it got close, but in the end, Detroit came out on top. Unfortunately for the Bucs, though, they have many things to do this offseason due to most of their roster being free agents. And those included in the list of free agents are Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans, two probably arguably the most pivotal pieces in the Bucs lineup right now. This brings Detroit the closest they have been to the Super Bowl in 30 years with this win. On the other side of the NFC divisional games, the Packers lost to the 49ers, and the Packers had them up until the last minute of the game, where Purdy and the 49ers led a game-winning drive, leaving the Packers with 1:07 left in the fourth. So the Packers did have a shot to still win. I mean, they had a lot of time. They still had all their timeouts. But the game ended with Jordan Love throwing a pick and giving the ball back to the 49ers with a little more than 40 seconds left on the clock. So the Niners are just able to kneel that out. Something to keep in mind with this game is that Deebo Samuel, one of the 49ers wide receivers and is arguably their best receiver, he had a shoulder injury in the first quarter of that game. And if he's not going to be playing in the NFC Championship game against the Lions, that could present a lot of problems for their offense. If Samuel's out, that means it's less work for Detroit secondaries. And arguably on the Detroit defense, their secondaries and their pass defense is relatively weak in comparison to their run defense. But if Deebo Samuel is going to be out, then that presents more opportunities for Detroit in a way. That also means that San Francisco is probably going to be using the run game a lot more. They're going to be using McCaffrey a lot, I imagine, in their game against Detroit. And McCaffrey also was having some problems with his calf in the Packers game. So if he is overused in this game against Detroit, then he could have an injury that keeps him out of the game as well, which presents even more opportunities for Detroit to sneak into the Super Bowl. Because I think last time I checked, they only had a 25% chance of beating the 49ers, according to ESPN. But I think I kind of want Detroit to win, so in a way, this is a good thing. I think it would be really cool if Detroit made the Super Bowl, and I'm also sick and tired of the stupid logo conspiracy for the Super Bowl. It's driving me nuts. I'm over it. Can we please just get off of that? If Detroit wins, none of their colors match the little color scheme of the logo. So, yeah, we'd be able to throw that conspiracy in the garbage can. Speaking of Detroit, I think if anyone has the embodiment of America's team right now, it is the Detroit Lions. The title has been very much associated with the Dallas Cowboys in the past, and in college football, it's recently been associated with Michigan because of all the adversity they went through to get to the college championship and win. And that, as Jim Harbaugh said, was one of the reasons why right now they're considered America's team. The Lions are also a great underdog story, which America loves. And we've all seen the progress that Detroit has made in the past 3 or 4 years. I think in 2021, they had the worst record in NFL history. And now they're, like a couple years later, they're in the NFC Championship game. I don't think anyone really saw that coming. They also won the NFC North for the first time ever. Before they were in the NFC North, it was called something else. But ever since they were in the NFC North, they had never won. So this is a big first for them as well. And like I said earlier, I really hope they make the Super Bowl because it gets rid of the logo conspiracy. The colors this year are red and purple, which people are saying means that the Ravens and 49ers are going to make the Super Bowl. And this has happened the previous 2 years. The Bengals game, so the first logo that there was, it was for the game in Los Angeles. And that was the Bengals-Rams game. And the colors of that logo were yellow and orange. And the game last year for the Super Bowl, it was the Eagles-Chiefs, and the logo's colors were red and green, matching the Eagles and Chiefs primary colors. I think it happens to be a coincidence. There's no way the NFL would have this happen 3 times in a row or more, because then people will get the impression that NFL is rigged. And also it makes it too predictable in a way, because then it's like, oh, well, we know which 2 teams are going to make the Super Bowl. It doesn't matter what happens in the regular season. We just know that these 2 teams are going to be in it. And I mean, I think this impression kind of already exists about the NFL, just like with the referees and the movement of the referees. But if I think if the 49ers and Ravens make the Super Bowl at the same time, matching the color logo, then it will be even more realized. All right, shifting over to college sports. I've been starting to see some people complaining online about the college basketball AP poll selections. And I've looked into this a little bit, but I kind of wanted to look into it a little bit further and talk about it now, just because we're starting to get towards the precipice of the college basketball season. And I thought the best way to do that was to compare it to the AP poll for football, since they're both under the AP college coaches website. And the idea of the polls is kind of the same. Like, the coaches all vote on which teams they think are number 1, and then based on all those votes, then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And both also only go up to 25 and have honorable mentions. I have noticed some differences before when I've made my March Madness brackets in previous years. When following both sports over time, that being in college football, everybody either plays on Friday or Saturday, so it's always one time a week around the same time, and the rankings come out once a week. So it's a lot easier to gauge an actual ranking for the AP poll. But for basketball, the way it works is the same, where it comes out once a week. But for college basketball, it's different because they play multiple times per week at times. And some team could, like Indiana, for instance, could, I don't know, if let's just say this week on Tuesday they played Purdue and then they won by 2 points, but then they go and then play Florida Atlantic on Thursday and then they lose by 10. So like my question, like since those opponents that IU would be playing are ranked, my question would be like, how would you gauge where to put them based on not only what IU has done like those 2 weeks, what the teams looked like, but you also have to base it on who Purdue's played, who Florida Atlantic has played that week, if they played anyone else. Like, you also have to consider the other top 25 teams and how they looked. I think there's just a lot more factors that go into the AP rankings for college basketball than football. Just with all those elements, it's a lot harder to place the teams. And I think because a lot of people will use the AP poll as a reference for like when they're making their March Madness brackets, because you get sort of a frame of mind of like who the top 25 teams are, who's like the next 10 teams below them maybe. And all those teams pretty much make it in to March Madness. But it's like the rankings could be a little bit biased maybe towards conferences. Like Oklahoma, for instance, I'm a little confused as to why they're on the rankings for basketball, just because they haven't really played a tough schedule at this point. And any of the tough games they have played, they've lost. So I don't really understand how they're in the top 25. But one of the factors is that they're in the Big 12. And right now the Big 12 is considered the most competitive basketball conference, even though, in my opinion, I think the Big East is the most competitive, just because you have the defending champions UConn in that conference. You have Creighton, who made the Elite Eight last year. You have Marquette, who was ranked number 2 last year in the tournament. And you've got a few other teams as well. I mean, St. John is playing really well right now. I think they were close to, or almost made the tournament last year. I think they're probably going to make the tournament this year. But I think the Big 12 numbers-wise has more teams that make that conference more competitive. But I think the competition level in the Big East makes it more competitive of a conference. But that also kind of goes into football versus basketball, because in football there's the Power 5 conferences and then there's the Group of 5 conferences, and that's how they split Division I football. But in basketball, there's no Power 5, there's no Group of 5, there's just Division I, and they're all grouped up collectively in one go. And their playoffs are bigger as well. And they include what we would consider for football Group of 5 teams. And sometimes, and thinking about this even further, you look at the Final Four last year, 3 of the 4 teams that made it to the Final Four would be Group of 5 conferences. You have Florida Atlantic, you have UConn, and you have San Diego State that all made the Final Four. The only Power 5 school that made the Final Four last year was Miami. So I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why I get a little annoyed with the bias towards like the Big 12, because Power 5, Group of 5, it doesn't matter in basketball. Like, everyone is able to make a competitive basketball team, whether you're a Power 5 football school or a Group of 5 football school. Although now next year it's the Power 4, but I mean, it's the same idea. Like, just because one conference is gone doesn't mean the idea of what a Power 5 conference is not gone. And that also leads to the diversity of the AP poll. I think there's a lot more diversity between schools in the basketball poll than there's the football poll. Like, in the football poll, you'll maybe see a couple Group of 5 teams sneak in. Like, I think Air Force was a Mountain West conference team that would sneak in. And then you've got Tulane that was in there. and then SMU, and that would be 3 out of 25. But then in the basketball one, you have a lot more. Like Gonzaga will be in it. Well, basically anyone in the Mountain West, like St. Mary's will be in it. Lots of Big East teams I was talking about earlier, like UConn and Marquette. And they'll make up more than in the football, like, rankings. I think that's also kind of what makes March Madness so interesting, is because I feel like a lot of the teams, like when you're watching basketball, like you're very much more easily drawn to like IU versus Purdue or like other Power 5 in conference matchups where they'd be going up against each other. But you wouldn't necessarily watch like the Group of 5 conference championship or just any of the Group of 5 teams. But then you see them in the tournament and then they'll win sometimes. And then people will say, well, why did they win? Well, you look at who they've played and like in their they kind of sneak under the radar because of being considered a Group of 5 school. Even though in basketball there is no such thing as Group of 5 or Power 5, just because football has such a big presence in college sports, it kind of carries over to the other sports as well. I guess that's like the only way I can really put that, is that it just, the terminology just carries over and the ideas of the terminology carry over as well. As we get closer to the conference championship tournaments, these rankings for basketball are going to be really important, especially to the teams that don't end up winning their conference championships, because conference champions make it into the tournament, and that's one of the things like for the lower, like the, I guess, bottom feeder conferences, as we would maybe consider them. That's how they would get in, and they would probably take like a 16 seed, maybe a 14 seed. But then that's also where like other teams that probably could make it in, but don't make it in, like getting far into their conference championship is huge for those teams that aren't in the top 25, but maybe they're in the top 50. And they could maybe slip under the rankings because they didn't win their conference championship, they didn't make it far enough in their tournament, they didn't get enough wins, whatever. Like it's a lot easier for them to kind of slip through the cracks. I think Clemson was one of those teams last year where they were good. They were probably good enough to make it into the tournament, but they ended up getting snubbed because they didn't win enough, and they got upset in their conference tournament, so that bumped them out of contention for March Madness. But yeah, we're like right at that part where we're hitting the part of the season where you face lots of tough in-conference competition, sometimes 3 times in 1 week. And that's where you really see, I think, where the adversity comes into play. Which is huge, especially for those big, like Purdue. I think they've run into a lot of problems in March Madness. The latest being losing to a 16 seed in the first round after being considered the number 1 seed in the tournament, being only the second to do that. I mean, I think that speaks a lot for like their game plan and also like a little bit of adversity too, because it seemed like they would run into problems and they didn't really seem to do a lot to fix it. And we saw that also when they played St. Peter's the year prior. I mean, like that stuff is really important for March Madness, because all these games in March Madness, they're at somewhat neutral sites, and depending on the matchup you get, it could really be a home game for the team that they play. Like, I think this year the NCAA championship is being hosted in Arizona. I don't remember if it's Phoenix or Tucson, but it's going to be hosted in Arizona. So if Arizona makes it to like the Final Four in the championship, they're gonna essentially have a home court advantage. Same thing last year as well. The final parts of the tournament were hosted in Houston, and that's why a lot of people picked Houston to make it really far, because they would have had the home court advantage. They would have had like the best chance of being able to win, because they're at home. They've trained at the elevation. It would be better to be at home than to be away. It's home court advantage is really important. You even see that with like rivalry games like IU versus Purdue, or like Florida State versus Miami. And especially in basketball, because you're in an enclosed space, so it's really echoey and it gets extra loud. You think football games get loud, but like most of those games they're outside. But there's more people, like they can seat more people, but it's outside. Inside, it's a lot different. Like everything is a lot more condensed and close, and like everyone's kind of in everyone's space. So it has like the home field advantage has a bigger impact in basketball, a little bit more than football. And that is all for today. Thank you all for coming on. The new logo hopefully done, but that will hopefully be done by next week. Fingers crossed. This week I was working on another project that took a lot of my focus away from doing the logo, so hopefully it'll be done by next week. Let me know you guys' Super Bowl picks by putting them in the Discord. I want Detroit to win. I think I could pick them to win, but I feel like they'd have a better chance against the Chiefs than the Ravens. Just because the Ravens have been dominant all year, and they've already played the Ravens and the Chiefs. So, although maybe it's hard to beat the same team twice, so maybe Detroit goes in and beats the Ravens in the Super Bowl. But you never know. Also, leave any possible topics in the Discord as well, and I will bring them up in next week's episode. I'll see you all next week. Peace.